Welcome to the BLUF, or the bottom line up front, with the FBI AIA. Today we have one of our AIA members with us, Daniel Giordano. So Daniel, what's the BLUF for today's session?
I think the core message is that there's a lot of opportunities out there, even when it doesn't seem like it, and the world is only getting more complicated, which make people like analysts incredibly valuable, even with all the AI. Um, so that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sierra Karcher, and I'm the COO of the FBI Association of Intelligence Analysts. The FBI AIA was formed in late 2021 by a small group of former FBI intelligence analysts who sought to build a community to advance the careers of intelligence professionals in the private sector and government through networking, mentoring, advocacy, and programming like this. So, a little bit more about Daniel Giordano. Daniel is the head of a global threat intelligence team at AP Moller Maersk in Copenhagen, where he leads the enterprise wide intelligence program spanning Maersk operations across land, sea, and air in 130 countries globally. The threat intel team there delivers on threat analysis to inform decision making across the organization, and especially during periods of crisis or conflict. Prior to Maersk, Daniel spent 15 years as an intelligence analyst in the FBI, working in DC, Seattle, and finally in the Legat in Copenhagen. Daniel, is there anything you would like to add before we jump into the session today?
I mean, aside from all that, I was born and raised in Philly, but that's pretty much it.
I didn't know that. I'm from outside
Yes.
of Philly in New
What?
Jersey.
Okay. All right. Powerhouse. Philly
Yes,
powerhouse.
love it. Are you a Philly sports fan?
By birth, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is. It's like being Catholic. Like you're never going to get away with it.
I love
No.
it. Okay, we can have an entirely separate tangent about this new information, new intel that just came through. Okay, so Daniel, can you start by giving our listeners and guests the short version of your journey from FBI intelligence analyst to head of threat intelligence at Maersk?
Yeah, I mean, it's a short version, but it was a long journey. So I joined the FBI when I was 22, so quite young actually, and I started working in DC on terrorism and then counterintelligence, insider threat, things like that. And then I found my way to Seattle a couple years later, working organized crime, and finally, right before COVID hit, I managed to get one of those coveted spots in the Legat office here in Copenhagen. And that's something I'd wanted to do since I had joined. So it really was kind of this culmination of a really long term goal. A couple years later, I found myself in a bit of a predicament because the Legat job is so unique. You as an analyst, you are kind of leading the charge. And I had to figure out whether I wanted to go back to the States and figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my FBI career, or look for new opportunities in Europe. Europe is a much different beast when it comes to security and intelligence than the US. So there was not a lot of kind of understanding of what that looked like. But after a lot of work later, I finally got this interview at Maersk for a position that had just been created. And it was a bit of a risk, but I think it's been working out all right. And that's where we are today, basically, is I took this risk, and now 2.5 years later, we have this team, and we're very busy.
That's amazing. I also joined the FBI when I was a 22-year-old baby. So I definitely feel like we grew up there in a
Yeah.
sense, and that definitely formative years professionally. Um, so when people hear logistics, they might think ships, ports, shipping containers, supply chains. From your perspective, what does the intelligence of logistics actually mean?
So I think the first thing people either might not realize or might not appreciate is logistics is really, really messy, but it's something we all depend on to get all the stuff we want, right? Mostly everything we buy is generally not coming from within 50 miles of where we live, so it has to be transported. And so companies like Maersk do that transporting. Um, in security risk management and resilience, we often talk about this idea of supply chain security or supply chain resilience, where an individual company will look at its own supply chain to determine where there might be a vulnerability and how they can best shore that up. For Maersk, for a company like Maersk, it's actually, we manage part of the supply chain, the global supply chain. And so the intelligence of logistics is really looking at where there can be disruptions or impacts to the global supply chain that can have impacts on populations and economies, food supply, medicine supply, things like that. And that's what we do day in and day out to make sure that we can make sure that trade is still moving, even in the face of all these disruptions and a very complex geopolitical navigating environment.
And it sounds like a very interesting time to join when you did.
Yeah, November 2023. It was November 1st, 2023 was my first day at Maersk, and November 19th, 2023 was when the Houthis seized the first ship in the Red Sea, which kind of upended, honestly, decades at that point of understanding of what the Houthis would do and how the Bab el Mandeb in the Red Sea would be impacted. And so it was a bit of trial by fire. Well, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure has not gotten any easier, or should I say, less complex.
Definitely not. I think we are, because we operate in so many different places, and we have to coordinate so many different things to make goods move. We're kind of at the forefront of understanding just how complex the world really is becoming. We're seeing kind of a fracturing of these long-standing orders of trade and conflict, and it's yeah, I don't know how else to put it, but except it is just getting more and more complicated. There are more and more things to take into consideration as variables, and it keeps us employed, so that's good.
Yes. So you had a very diverse 15-year career with the FBI across espionage, counterintelligence, terrorism, organized crime, interagency collaboration, and even overseas intelligence sharing. Which parts of that experience translated most directly into your work now?
So, subject wise, I think all of it. All of it's relevant for the private sector these days. I don't think a major company operating internationally can get away with just ignoring terrorism or organized crime or even espionage, to be quite frank. There are threats coming from all sorts of different angles. So that the knowledge background in terms of subject matter is incredibly useful. But I think really it's the soft skills or the invisible skills that we might not realize when we're in it, when we're in the bureau, that we're developing these skills. Um, I often say to my team that one of the first things we learned when we went through our FBI intelligence training was you need to get skilled at who your stakeholder actually is and what they're actually asking for, because what they ask for isn't really what they need. And so really listening and really listening for what the critical piece of information is, that's a skill set, and not just blindly answering questions, right? Um, Also understanding how your message needs to be directed. We write at Maersk, we write for a number of different stakeholders internally, and a message for the COO is going to be very different than a message for a regional security manager. They're going to have different needs, they're going to have different requirements, and I think that's something in the bureau as an analyst you're used to kind of covering a broad range of stakeholders, whether you're at headquarters or out in the field. And so you develop that skill very quickly, because if you don't, you don't make it. um, and I think that in the private sector is really, really, really valuable. And I think it's not something a lot of people can do very easily. So I would say those soft skills that especially as analysts in the FBI, that we picked up over the years um, that really add the value, for me at least at Maersk.
Yeah, I love that, because I feel like in the Bureau, because it was originally formed not as what we consider a traditional intelligence organization, it formed initially as a law enforcement organization. I feel like FBI intelligence professionals have to do a lot of pre and post stakeholder management work, especially in educating what intelligence is, how it can be used, and more importantly, how those stakeholders can actively engage in the intelligence process by asking questions, identifying opportunities for collection or operations, like really involving the analyst in those conversations. I feel like that's where those soft skills come into play. It's not a transactional relationship. It's not like, hey, analyst, give me this and then I give you that. Like it's actually that professional cadence of analysis that's happening throughout.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, it's also in the bureau, and I noticed this when we worked a lot with other agencies. In the bureau, we had to be very specific when we wrote our analysis because there was always
Mm-hmm.
that understanding that whatever you write could potentially be discoverable in court, right? So you had to be really precise with your words, really exact. And I think that that is something that the modern business, the modern corporation, hasn't had enough of. There's a lot of squishy language in corporations. There's a lot of yeah, I don't even know how else to put it except for that. But they're not used to somebody coming out and saying this is what we think is going to happen and this is why.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. And here it's clear and it's concise and it's cited, right? That is a I think that was a bit of a game changer when we really started doing that at Maersk because they weren't used to it. And I don't think many companies really are used to it, but they can really really benefit from it, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. We talked a lot about, what is translatable and what's helpful. Was there anything that you had to unlearn or adjust to adapt to this new environment?
Oh, absolutely. I think first and foremost, it's the jargon, right? At the bureau, we have kind of a separate language that we would use to communicate ideas and thoughts. And you have to learn another language, right? Because each company has their own culture and their own abbreviations. But also when you're talking about threats, to really make it relevant to a decision maker, to a reader, because they're not a security, they're more than likely not going to be a security or an intelligence professional. They're going to be a business professional. And you need to make it, you can't write um, your message in a way that's going to make them bored. So, so being much more, I think my direct manager called it. It's much more down to earth, right? It's much more. The headlines are much more, what just happened. Like we do a piece and we say what just happened, and then here's a capture, kind of capturing a recent event, and then what's in it for Maersk. Like just right up front, here's what's in it for us, and here's some key takeaways. I also say brevity is really important for business leaders, for leaders in the company. Anything over 2 pages, it doesn't work anymore unless it's a real specific ask. Um, but I think the one thing that I will absolutely not, I will take to the grave with me is the idea of a bluff, right? And not be, it's not a plug for anything, but really it is. It's it's the idea of right up front and not an executive summary, a bluff, which are different. And I will fight you. I will fight anybody if they say they're the same. Um, and we started doing that, and I think that is they're not used to that either, and they really love it because it tells them everything they need to know right up front um, to enable a decision. So I refuse to get rid of that one.
Yeah, no, I'm in your camp on that, by the way. So no fight necessary. But no, I have the same conversations in with my colleagues about what's the difference between a so what or a bluff and executive summary, and how important it is that at minimum the bluff is in the executive summary early on. But if you're going to give one or the other, the bluff is almost like your elevator pitch for a stakeholder to read what you wrote and figure out how quickly to action it, or at least give it to somebody, to another colleague who will action it. But yeah, I love that. In terms of Maersk's mission, you talked about how it's basically you're seeing the world as it is now operating, and you're seeing a lot of intersections of supply chain, people, economies at scale. Was there anything about the mission that was really exciting to you? Because a lot of the people that we talked to who left the bureau say that they initially struggled with leaving the bureau's mission, when they were going to the private sector.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common thing. You in the bureau, you have such a unique mission, and you're not there for the bottom line, right? You are there I mean, for lack of a better term, to serve and protect, right? You're there because you want to be there. Whereas at a company like Maersk, we are working for the bottom line. We work for the shareholder. We work for our profits, right? I mean, just like any other company. But I think what kind of carries me through is that Maersk, we don't produce anything. We are a facilitator. We make sure things can get from point A to point B. We make sure that businesses can move their goods and can enter new markets, things like that. So I really like that idea, from a even just a theoretical point of view, that we're a company that can help people find new places. We're a company that can help customers find new solutions. Um, and and working within the kind of security and resilience department framework mindset, um, we do have a cause to protect our people, right? So our cause is still very much aligned with mentally what we used to do in the bureau. Is we want to make sure people can go home at the end of the day, that they're not put in harm's way because of the job we've asked them to do, right? That duty of care requirement that we all have. um, and look, our modern world depends on the trade. It depends on economies producing and economies consuming, and somebody has to move all that stuff. And I would prefer it be companies that have transparent business practices and are reportable to public boards and shareholders than shady ones. And I like working for a company that if we find ourselves doing something we shouldn't have done, we say we shouldn't have done that, and we move to fix it, and we stop doing it, and we're open about it, right? I think there's something to that. It's a very Danish mindset, but there is something to that. Then, and I think it makes you feel better that you're not just working for the bottom line. So you have to find that wherever you go, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sure like as you're going through the day to day, you're seeing a lot of those natural overlaps from your prior missions. So yeah, I like to consider these career trap chapter transitions as like an extension of what we loved about the bureau, about making the world safer and making people safer. And a lot of that comes down to identifying threats early and clearly and objectively. So, on that topic, what in your mind is kind of top of mind in terms of the threat landscape for your company?
I mean, it's 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 anything you can think of. We generally kind of prioritize on geopolitical issues, terrorism, extremism, conflict and instability, and climate. Um, those are kind of our main categories. But it's like, if you've ever, actually. So when I was in Seattle, I worked in an RA, which it's very similar mindset in that we have a prioritization. We have kind of a thing, a priority of threats that we're going to work, but we're going to have to look at everything that comes through the door. And I think that that's actually the right mindset to have about it, because it's such a broad operation that we can't say, oh yeah, we're not going to look at that, because that might be of utmost impact to the business in one region versus another region, and we can't just ignore it. Um, but I will say that they all are played together. All the threats that we look at, they interact, right? So we spend a lot of time making sure that we're highlighting that, so that we can avoid things like stovepiping, because that, obviously we all know is bad, right? We don't like stovepiping. um, but yeah, it's all sorts of things. I think the one that I find the most interesting right now, to be honest with you, is actually climate disruptions, like threats from climate disruption, because there's not much we can do about it, and um, there's not much we can do about it in the near term either, I should say. With the other stuff, with geopolitical issues, even we can lobby governments, right? We can talk to intelligence services, for instance. Terrorism, extremism, same thing. But with climate operations, with climate disruption, excuse me, you're basically saying, hey guys, we want to invest in a port, and it's a 30-year mortgage. Is this a good idea? And it's like, I have no idea, right? We don't know what this is going to look like, because every day, it looks like what we thought 10 years ago isn't necessarily true what we think now, and how's that going to impact? And then also looking at climate disruption on the other threats. So how does How does climate instability change food supply, for instance? And how is that how can that lead to political disruption? It, it's it gets really really interesting, but it's like a systems thinking type of thing, and so I kind of love it because we get really nerdy sometimes.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm sure you come across a lot of interesting combinations of, oh, I didn't think these two would interact with each other. Was there ever like a weird topic or something that you were like, I never expected to do analysis on this particular issue?
Yes, and I can't tell you about it because it's actually in date right now. But yes, definitely there have been times I've sat in these meetings and went, huh, okay, I did that is not that was not on my radar, folks. Like,
I would
but
love
yeah,
to see your bingo card in a few years, what that looks like.
yeah.
Um, um, so how does what you do differ from maritime intelligence?
So traditionally, maritime intelligence is threats at sea, right? So it's piracy. It's focused on piracy. It's focused on safety more than anything else, right? So if ships are sailing through a certain area in the world where safety of the crew or the cargo could be put at risk, that's where maritime intelligence really comes in. And we don't discard maritime intelligence. We have a team that actually looks at the kind of ships at sea, the safety and security of ships at sea. But the reality is that those ships are, they have to go somewhere. They can't just stay at sea, right? They have to go somewhere, and wherever they end up going is going to have an impact on kind of, well, it can have an impact on their security. Um, for an instance, for an example, you could use the Red Sea, right? So the Houthis in the Red Sea. Let me see if I can remember this exactly. The Houthis in the Red Sea, when they started their campaign, they slowly expanded how they were targeting vessels, and eventually it became vessels that had ever called at a port in Israel. And it was like, whoa, well, lots of ships have called at ports in Israel. And how do we determine that? How do they determine that? And that's never a year ago, they weren't taking that into consideration, right? Because that's a silly thing to think that you would want to target a ship that way. But we had to do that. We had to go through this whole exercise of going through, all the historic kind of routings and port calls of all these different ships and basically scrub them and say, this one, these aren't, these have never called it Israel, or these have called it Israel, but it was more than 2 years ago or whatever. Uh, so I think they kind of combine a lot. It's the same thing with cybersecurity, right? Cyber intelligence. I think a lot of times we think that it's kind of off in its own little world, which a lot of times it is. But there's more convergence happening now than I think there ever was when we were in the bureau. Oftentimes, you either have a cyber indicator that's leading to a real world disruption, or you have a real world disruption that's leading to a cyber indicator. It's the same thing with maritime intelligence. They kind of play off each other.
Yeah, and I love how you put that because I think it extends even further to other types of intelligence. And at this point, you can have a specialty, you can have a favorite. My personal favorite is counterintelligence. I'll see counterintelligence everywhere I go. Um, but you really, as an analyst, have to be open to other domains and other subject matter. It's really hard at this point to be an analyst and stay in one rabbit hole for too long. And I think in the Bureau, that was one of the benefits of the setups for us.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that the Bureau, we prioritized, and I truly mean this, and I think this is one of the strengths of the Bureau's analytic program is they prioritized building good analysts and not necessarily building somebody who knows everything there is to know about China. I don't, that doesn't necessarily add as much value as you think it does, because there's always going to be people that know everything there is to know about China. But it takes a lot to actually make somebody a very good analyst, right? So that they can apply that methodology to any different threat. That if you're an FBI analyst and you've worked different threats, you have no idea how valuable that is, because you know how to take that skill set and transfer it. And that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I even think, the setup of the Bureau's 56 field offices and the consolidated strategy guide, the threat prioritization process, like if we kind of abstract all of those things that we do in the Bureau to really focus our resources based on area of responsibility and impact. I mean, that's essentially what the private sector is doing every day at the individual company and sector level.
Mhm.
They're recalibrating constantly. And I think Bureau analysts have a very unique optic into what threat prioritization and that recalibration looks like, not just at a program and field office level, but even as a personal analyst when you're making decisions about your career and you're considering different office assignments or squads or even going to a legat, you are thinking about what type of threats you will be working, what you can bring to the table, and what
Yeah,
kind of experiences you'll get back.
yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, I think the Bureau, that's one of the best things about the Bureau. We build good analysts.
Yep. So when you are thinking about intelligence for where you're at now, we're dealing with a lot of incomplete information. So, how do you approach uncertainty, especially in a sector like logistics where it feels like very tangible and black and white? How do you
Yeah.
deal with this ambiguity?
So first and foremost, we're upfront about the incompleteness of the picture, right? We remind people that yes, there's always more information to be had, but no, you probably won't have it, and you're still going to have to make a decision. So we're going to help you with that. Some of the things that we used to do in the bureau and with good intelligence analysis is really that's what does that, right? So laying out what we're assuming to be true, what could change, or what we're assuming to be true, and if it changes, like how that can change our entire assessment. Um, Laying out what we know from what we don't know. So really laying out this is what we've observed and this is what we're assessing, so that people can get a really clear picture of what we think versus just some, because a lot of times, not to be too harsh on my business folks, but it can be very wordy sometimes because people want to they're talking of it's an opinion piece, right? It's a I think this is going to happen or this could happen, and we try and stay away from that as much as possible, just like we did in the bureau, which is no, you write from a voice and you have an active voice and you use simple words and direct message, and you're very diligent about making sure that the reader understands what it is you're assessing versus what it is you have observed versus what it is other people have observed, right? Um, and that helps. I mean, we aside from that, we also have instituted our own kind of uncertainty likelihood ruler, which actually it's a small thing, but I wow if people are just blown away by it. It's such a simple thing, but it's like, oh, now I understand what you mean. I'm like, what did you think before? Like when people were saying all this stuff and you just went with it. So that's one thing that is very easy to introduce. But that the rigorousness, the structure, the tradecraft, I guess, that you adhere to is really what's going to help with making decision makers feel better about making a decision, even in the midst of uncertainty, because that's the goal that we generally have: is somebody has to make a decision about something, and how do we help that, even when we don't know we're not going to know all the answers, right? We're not witches. We don't have a crystal ball. So how do we help them with that? And I think that's tradecraft is a huge part of that.
Yeah. And how do you handle, because you talked about, using clear language, simple language. How do you handle either the nuance of the subject matter where something at face value is actually a lot more complex, and that complexity naturally lends itself to a lot of follow-on questions or, trying to tamp down any assumptions. But beyond just the subject matter, how do you handle the nuance of estimative language?
Yeah, I mean, we've so I can kind of give you an example with the crisis, with the Middle East crisis that we're all, I guess, currently dealing with still. Is that that started, and actually in the lead up to it, we were doing a number of analyses, and we had a set of indicators, and we were slowly, actually, as we got through February, we were slowly getting to the point where we're like, yeah, guys, this is going to happen, and we're fairly certain this is going to happen. And I think one of the things that we really pushed in that moment was showing people the indicators. This is why we're saying this, right? So these have been observed, these haven't been. These are kind of partially observed, et cetera, et cetera. And when we wrote our assessment on at the end of February, we basically again, very direct, and said, we think it's highly likely that there's going to be U.S. strikes against Iran by the 15th of March. And between now and the 15th of March, we'll see an increasing likelihood should these diplomatic talks not work, basically. That's not verbatim. I'm just trying to remember. But the point is that you tell that to them. They have the ruler and kind of what that means in terms of how confident we are. Is it 80 to 90%? Is it 60 to 70%? And you tell them this is what we're saying. This is what we're looking at here. How do I put this? I am very adamant about using the active voice. So threat actor does what to create what kind of situation, right? Because when you start to use the passive voice, it hides the actor doing the action, and that can lead to confusion, especially in written products. Not necessarily in oral briefings, but in written products, very much so. Which is a cultural thing, because apparently in Danish, they use passive voice all the time. And so Danes usually write in English a lot of times in the passive voice. So this was a whole thing, because it was really important that we were very, very clear about who's going to do what, and also understanding who we're telling it to. If we're telling it to the COO, it needs to be one bullet, right? One bullet. She's only going to read one bullet. If it's a report for a security manager, then we can get more in depth and say, here are the things we're looking for. Here are the things you need to look for. Here's some of the context behind this. What I noticed, and again, we've been building this intelligence function for a couple of years now. And what I've noticed is when you start doing that, when you start kind of giving the leaders kind of the taste of that professionalism, that tradecraft, that methodology, the directness, they want more. And they will actually come back and say, okay, can you actually give me 15 minutes and kind of run me through what it is we're looking at? Or you're asked to then join the crisis management team meetings and give your briefing and answer questions from senior leaders around the business, because there are going to be questions, and you are dealing with people who aren't coming from that background. So of course they're going to have questions. And your job is to kind of do two things. Your job is to make sure that they don't get unnecessarily wound up, because people tend to do that when they're uncomfortable with what's going on around them. It's a stress response. And your other job is to make sure they're as well informed as possible with the best information as possible. It's not easy, but it is definitely rewarding. I have to say that. So, if I may.
That's awesome. And I love that you're noting where you're getting pulled into these other cross-functional adjacent teams to share intelligence as well. Do they also get a copy of written products, or is it more of a different ecosystem?
So we will share our intelligence with whoever needs it. So with the crisis, actually, we have a landing page on our intranet site, and we just direct people there. And we're like, hey guys, we're doing a lot. We've got reports or assessments that we're doing on the trajectory of the conflict. We have assessments that we're doing on the Strait of Hormuz. We have a look at extraterritorial operations, right? So the kind of hybrid threat element, terrorism in Europe, activism, things like that. Go in there and see and read what we've got in there before asking more questions, because oftentimes the question's been asked already. And it's very much like trying to replicate like the Intel portal, or which I haven't thought about in years, but that's kind of the concept is you need a place where you can put all this stuff and people can go and see what's being said already. And then they can use it, right? It's for Maersk. We work for Maersk. So we're not contractually obligated to one internal stakeholder or another. And that's what I keep reminding people is, We're here to make the business better. We're here to really help the company navigate this climate, this crisis, these issues. So whatever you need, like, it's there. And if you have other questions, then let's talk about it.
That's awesome. Before we transition to the logistics of you leaving government and going to Denmark, anything else you want to share from your experience, working intelligence and logistics? Um,
Mm,
anything, anything that we haven't covered?
I mean, I think, when we're talking about logistics and the supply chain, I think, you know, it's, as for a lot of other companies, what is happening in the maritime domain, what is happening in the logistics domain can actually be some of your leading indicators, what these companies are starting to do, because we have to be on kind of the forefront, because we have to operate in that weird space, right? It's like a lot of times when you're dealing with a crisis, people look at what the airlines are doing, because the airlines don't want to send planes into the middle of a war zone, right? So they're going to be more cautious and they might hold flights back. It's the same thing with a company like Maersk, or DHL or UPS or FedEx or something like that, right? Because logistics is very complicated, and when you pull on one part of the system, another part of the system can be impacted, and you have to be really careful about how you do that. So we don't like to screw with it a lot. We don't like to mess it up, because it's very, very complicated. And so I think for folks that are working in the private sector, or even in the FBI, right, even in the government, I think looking at what companies that operate those kind of logistics networks do when it comes to a crisis or political instability or et cetera, that kind of thing, can actually be really helpful as a leading indicator. Um, we've we haven't seen that very often, and I don't. I was thinking back to, did we ever do that in the bureau? And I don't think I ever did, but we I will say that I think the government still has the government still owns classified information, right? It still owns SIGINT and MASINT and all that stuff. But the amount of information that is available to private companies is incredible. And there long are the days when the government can say, "Oh yeah, we know this because we know it," because we probably know more and we probably have more recent information, but it's coming from multiple different places. So I think it's worth listening to that. I think it's worth listening to what those companies are doing, that can help your own security practices, your own resilience practices, I guess.
That is a great point, and it sounds like maybe some of your intel that you're developing should make its way out of the organization on that point. But I could see how that could be a little complicated.
It's tricky. It's not impossible. We certainly share a lot more than I think we ever have before.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your transition from the FBI to the private sector, and how that, I guess, what was your thought process or your decision points to make that initial leap?
Well, like I had said before, I found myself at kind of the tail end of this really amazing experience here in the Legat, and I couldn't find an opportunity back in the States that really spoke to me. And I don't know whether it's because I'm an elder millennial, or it's because but I actually was looking for that. I didn't want to just go and work in an office, the same office, for the next 20 years. I wanted something that was going to challenge. I wanted something that was going to actually keep me interested, because there's a long career ahead of us, basically. Um, and so I was, I had a lot of discussions with some really amazing folks in the bureau, that were mentors to me, who are sadly no longer there. But and they agreed, and they said, this, if and actually I had a really great conversation with one person who really helped me put this into context. And she basically said, whatever decision you make is the right decision. And if you decide to come back, we will make sure that you find an amazing place, and you will of course be successful, and we will make sure you're successful. And if you decide to stay and find another job, we will obviously support you and you will be successful because we will make sure you're successful, right? Like there's people behind you and everybody wants to see you do the best. And I think that really, that almost made that almost made it harder to leave because you know you're leaving such amazing people, such an amazing kind of community of people there. But I think that that really helped me kind of understand the decision that I was making was really, it was about what was going to keep me moving the next 10, 20 years. Was going to keep me interested the next 10, 20 years. And yeah, I don't know how else to put that, but it's a hard decision. I don't think anybody takes it lightly. It's a really hard decision, especially when you've been in an organization like that. You know the organization so well, right? It's so comfortable. So it's really scary to kind of go into a place that you have no idea how it works and what the culture is. And well, if I say this, people are going to think, what but it makes you grow, and it makes you better at what you do. And I think what I do is intelligence. What I'm passionate about is intelligence, and so doing that makes me better at it.
Was there anything that was especially difficult about relocating to Europe?
Well, I mean, insofar physically, I was already here, right? So that helped. I was actually already here. What made it hard was that this isn't something people do very often. So the processes aren't in place, right? So when I called HRD to tell them what I was doing, they're like, "Yeah, but what are we supposed to do about that?" I'm like, I don't know. You're supposed to process this. Like that's your job, guys. Um, and the same thing on the Maersk side was, well, you're coming from a job in Denmark, and I'm like, but it's not really a job in Denmark, is it? Like, it's a job at the embassy, and I work for the American government, so I'm not in the Danish system. I'm not, it's reminding people that you don't like. And I had another colleague who also left the Liga, and now she started a job in Denmark, and she went through the same thing, right? Is you find yourself in this weird middle space because people are looking at you like, but you're in Denmark, you're here, but you're not really here. So how does this work? And you just have to kind of take a deep breath and just make a list of, this is what you need to know, this is what you need to know, this is what I need to know, and I have to keep track of it all. I think the trickier part was when you really kind of make that transition, you're severing a bit more of those ties you have with the States, right? So you're moving into a culture that isn't American, right? Yes, I was living in Denmark, but I was working at the embassy. So I'm going to work in an American office every day. And when you're not doing that anymore, you realize, oh, it is different. Oh, there are some cultural bridges that I need to cross. You have to learn the language. You're in another country now. You are in their country now. And so you can complain about it all. I do. I complain very often about, why do we do this way here? This seems so inefficient. And the response is, if you don't like it, you can always go back home. And I'm like, fair point. That's true. I could do that. So it's that kind of thing. It's actually getting in your mindset that you are now in a different place, right? It feels the same. You're in the same city. You see the same people, but you're in a different place now. That actually was, I think, the hardest thing for me to do.
Is there anything you wish you had known then that you know now to ease the transition?
Yeah. So Maersk set us up with this is very specific, but Maersk set us up with like a tax advisor when we joined, to kind of tell us how things would work in Denmark. And the US is a very unique country in that we tax citizens globally. So even if you're not living in the States, you are still liable to file your income taxes for the United States, and you might still owe taxes on your income. They didn't really know the right answers for that, and I just kind of assumed that we would figure it out. I 100% should have been talking to a U.S. Accountancy firm, 2.5 years ago. It's fine. I mean, I'm not on the IRS's list, but it's complicated. It's very, very complicated to be an American citizen overseas. And you have to keep track of things that you would never think of keeping track of in the States. And had I known that 2.5 years ago, it'd have been a lot easier. But now I found a really great firm that's handling it for me, but it comes at a cost, and it would have been easier had I just done this myself 2.5 years ago. I would say that I think don't underestimate how complicated it can be to move overseas. We see influencers do it all the time. I'm going to move here. I'm going to move there. It ain't that easy. Newsflash, but it is possible. And if you really want to do it, there's an avenue. But you got to understand what you need to do, what you're responsible to do, because you are ultimately the person responsible for it at the end of the day.
I think that's really helpful. So the takeaway, if you're considering leaving the United States and going, even I think a temporary like secondment,
Mhm.
talk to U.S. tax people, talk to, get your healthcare, legal
Yeah,
matters,
and don't
financial matters. Yep.
I think the other part is be a bit forceful, right? Like don't if you're talking to if let's say you're in the States and you've had the same tax guy for 20 years and he's good with your taxes in the States and he gets you your mortgage deduction and your education deduction, whatever. He might not know anything about overseas taxation. Don't let him think he does. Like get the answers you need to get, right? Because it's your butt on the line at the end of the day, not theirs. So always make sure you're looking out for number one on that.
I love that. So to kind of wrap up this bluff session, do you have any advice for government analysts or private sector analysts who are interested in getting involved in the logistics sector from a security, risk management, and intelligence standpoint?
I think it's a very fertile ground. There are a lot of opportunities that I see posted very often, particularly in the States, actually. Um, and maybe with companies that you wouldn't think. Amazon actually has a lot. Amazon's one of the biggest logistics facilitators in the world. Um, uh, don't be afraid to also do some cold calls or cold LinkedIn's or reach out to people. That happens. Just do it, right? I think in the bureau we're kind of conditioned a little bit to not necessarily do that. And in the private sector, that's kind of how things work. So if you see somebody with a job role that looks really cool at a company that you think is interesting, reach out to them, ask them how they did that, ask them, if they can give you advice on your particular profile and what you might need to do, a class you might need to take or a certification you can do. I would say, and this is a piece of advice I gave some of my colleagues who were looking to leave, retire and go into the private sector from the bureau, was start looking at where you like kind of the industries you're looking at that interest you and look at what professional certifications would make the most sense, because you can still do those on GETA funding in the bureau, and the bureau is happy to do it. Do it. Just do it. Go get those certifications done, because if you can show that not only are you coming from an FBI background and you have an investigative and intelligence background, but you're also taking an interest in how the private sector kind of standardizes its way of working, who else are they going to hire? I mean, you make yourself so sellable, I guess is the way to put it, so marketable. Just yeah, go for it. And yeah.
That is some really great advice. Thank you. So I believe we're at time, which I'm sad because I feel like this could go on for easily like another hour. But Daniel, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience, everything that you've learned. And I know a lot of our listeners and attendees will get a lot of value out of their own decision processes, working through uncertainty with the job market and potentially moving overseas. So I'm just really grateful for your time. Do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think this is great. It's always nice to kind of actually think about how cool it was that we worked in the FBI and what we learned there. I would say that if anybody hears this and they're interested in moving overseas or what security and intelligence stops, particularly in Europe, look like, please feel free to reach out. I know job hunting is one of the most frustrating things we ever do in our lives, right? But there are a lot of opportunities out there, and it's just a matter of kind of finding the right keywords. So I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll catch you at the next bluff.